Here is what nobody tells you about becoming the most feared man in Seoul. The nights get very quiet. Kang Jihoon turned 38 at 9:07 p.m. on a Tuesday, alone in an office built to intimidate, in a tower named after himself, in a city he controlled. His phone showed 0 messages. The birthday cake his housekeeper had ordered for the estate was sitting in a refrigerator 40 minutes away, unlit, untouched. His fiancée was boarding a helicopter to Jeju for a long weekend with her friends. And she had not said happy birthday. She had asked for the black card. This, he thought, was the empire he had built. The crime lord was alone. Nobody remembered his birthday. Kang Jihoon turned his phone face down on the desk with a single quiet movement. No force, no drama, just the gesture of a man who has stopped expecting anything. 0 messages, 0 missed calls. The clock on the wall of his 62nd floor office read 9:07 p.m. And the most feared man in Seoul had just turned 38 years old in complete silence. Below the floor-to-ceiling glass, the city burned the way only Seoul could burn at night. Neon cutting through rain, the Han River threading silver between towers, 10 million lives moving in the dark with no idea that the man watching from above had spent 19 years making sure they never had to know his name. Judges answered his calls. Police commissioners looked the other way. Rival syndicate heads had a habit of vanishing before they could become problems. The Black Crane Brotherhood had built an empire from Itaewon's gambling dens to offshore accounts on 3 continents, and Kang Jihoon had bled for every floor of it. He had crushed everything that needed crushing. He had buried everything that needed burying. He had become the kind of man that whole rooms of dangerous people went quiet for. And somewhere in the building of all of that, he had forgotten how to want anything at all. The office door opened without a knock. Yoon Soo-yeon didn't knock. Soo-yeon had never knocked in 3 years because knocking implied the possibility of being told no, and the daughter of Chairman Yoon Byung-chul did not entertain that possibility. She came in the way she came into every room. Silk Valentino, a Birkin bag that cost more than most Seoul apartments, heels striking the marble floor like a countdown. Her eyes were on her phone, and her expression suggested she had already decided this conversation would be an inconvenience. The helicopter to Jeju was waiting, she said. Her friends had already boarded. And the black card, she needed the black card because hers was declined at the Cheongdam boutique, which was, apparently, someone else's fault. Jihoon looked at her. Not searching for love, he had stopped that long ago, but hoping, in the way a man reaching the very bottom of something still hopes, and for one small sign that she registered him as a person in the room. He said, quietly, that today was his birthday. Soo-yeon's fingers paused on her screen for exactly 1 second. She looked up, not at him, at the general direction of him, with the expression of someone who has just been interrupted by a mildly inconvenient weather forecast. Then she smiled the way people smile when they want to end a conversation. 38, Jae-won-si. Not 8. She dropped the card from her bag onto the desk. Adults don't need cake. Her heels were already moving toward the door. I'll be back Tuesday. Don't wait up. The door closed behind her. The silence that followed was a different kind than the silence before. Before, the office had been empty. Now, it had been emptied. Jihoon sat without moving for a long moment. A bitter sound that wasn't quite a laugh left his mouth. This was his life. This was the arrangement he had constructed with precision and intent. The Yoon alliance that stabilized his empire. The fiancé that gave the Black Crane Brotherhood a face respectable enough to sit at the same table as Seoul's most powerful chaebol families. Everything calculated, everything correct, everything completely hollow. He was the most feared man in this city, and he had never felt so much like nothing in his life. He stood, took his jacket from the back of the chair, and left without telling anyone where he was going. No driver, no security detail. Just the Bentley and the rain and the long drive north through Gangnam toward the old Kang family estate in Seongbuk-dong. The house he almost never visited anymore because it was full of rooms that remembered things he had trained himself to forget. He couldn't have explained why tonight was the night he needed to go back. He would understand later. He would understand everything later. But first, the gates. And the rain on the roof, the engine going quiet, and then breaking through the darkness of a house that was supposed to be empty. Laughter. If this story resonates with you, like and subscribe, because what happens next will leave you hooked till the end. The Sig Sauer was in his hand before the front door finished opening. 19 years of surviving in a world that rewarded the paranoid had made the reflex automatic. Threat detected, weapon drawn, and body moving before the conscious mind had caught up with the instinct. Jae-won stepped into the dark foyer of the estate with the careful, soundless tread of a man who had walked into hostile rooms all his life. His eyes swept the entrance. Nothing out of place. The lights were off in the hallway. The security panel by the door showed green across every sensor. And yet, laughter, getting louder. He followed it. Down the main corridor, past the framed calligraphy his grandfather had hung in 1974, and no one had ever had the authority to move, past the cabinet that held his father's ceremonial swords, toward the warm glow leaking from beneath the sitting room door. The laughter was high and completely fearless, the laughter of someone who had no idea they were in any danger at all. There was a second voice beneath it, low and warm, speaking Korean with an accent he couldn't immediately place, and breaking into helpless laughter of its own between words. Jae-won put his hand on the door and pushed it open. He stood there for 3 full seconds without moving. The sitting room looked like the aftermath of a very specific kind of disaster. The birthday cake Mr. Oh had ordered from the patisserie in Insadong, the one Jae-won had neither asked for nor expected, had been located, extracted from the kitchen refrigerator, transported to the sitting room by means that defied easy explanation, and distributed across approximately every surface in the space. The antique cedarwood coffee table, which had survived 3 generations of the Kang family and 1 very aggressive police search in 2019, was now frosted white along one entire edge. 2 of the silk cushions his mother had brought back from Kyoto bore perfect small handprints in vanilla cream. A long smear of chocolate ran across the lower section of the wall in a single triumphant arc, like a signature. In the center of this catastrophe sat 2 toddlers, neither older than 2, completely unbothered. The boy had black hair and dark eyes and wore most of the white frosting across his face and left cheek like he had applied it deliberately, like war paint before a great campaign. He was examining a broken birthday candle with the focused intensity of a scientist. The girl, warm brown skin, so wide, bright eyes that missed absolutely nothing, had dragged the decorative stone Buddha from the garden somehow, positioned it in front of her on the rug, and was earnestly attempting to feed it a fistful of chocolate cake with the patient persistence of someone who believed it was simply a matter of offering enough times. Crouched between them, half laughing and half losing the battle against it, was a woman in a gray household uniform. Black, natural hair pulled back. Warm, dark skin. Her hands coated completely white with buttercream up to the wrists. She was trying to wipe frosting from the boy's ear with a cloth that had long since surrendered its purpose, and she was failing, because he kept turning his head away with a shriek of laughter every time she got close, and she kept laughing too, despite herself, despite the walls, despite all of it. She hadn't heard him come in. Then she turned. The Sig Sauer came down, not slowly, immediately on pure reflex, and before Jae-won had processed a single conscious thought about why. He knew those eyes. Not from a file, not from surveillance, not from any of the 1,000 faces that moved through the operational life of a man like him. He knew them from a hotel bar in Mapogu on the worst night of his life. 2.5 years ago, the night 2 of his closest men died in an ambush meant for him, the night he had walked into a bar wanting only to stop being himself for a few hours. She had asked him nothing, and given him one night of being just a man. He had left before dawn. He had told himself he'd had no choice. His eyes moved to the boy without permission. Dark eyes. That particular sideways tilt of the head when confronted with something unfamiliar. Jae-won had seen that tilt in photographs of himself at that age. His own jawline, softened by infancy but unmistakable. The straight line of the brow, 20 months old. He knew it without asking. Add 9 months, 30 months total. Or 2.5 years. The math was merciless and instantaneous and left no room for doubt. Then the little girl noticed him. She turned from the stone Buddha, looked up at the tall man in the doorway with absolutely no fear whatsoever, and extended her arm toward him, a small fist wrapped around a generous portion of birthday cake, offered with complete sincerity, as though he were simply someone who had been away for a while, as though he had finally, after a very long time, come home. And the gun was at his side. He had forgotten it was there entirely. Mr. O appeared in the doorway behind Jae-won with the unhurried calm of a man who had spent 35 years managing the Kang household through things considerably worse than this. He surveyed the room without visible distress. Then he clasped his hands behind his back and began to explain, in the measured tone of someone delivering a weather report, that the woman in the gray uniform was Zara Mensah, assigned by the Premium Home Staffing Agency, first day of placement, starting this morning as scheduled. Her regular childcare arrangement had collapsed without notice, a closure, no warning, no alternatives. She had no family in Seoul to call, no one to leave the children with. Mr. O had made an executive decision to permit the twins in the kitchen while she worked. The kitchen arrangement, he acknowledged with a slight pause. I had lasted approximately 11 minutes before the children located the refrigerator. He did not apologize. He simply finished speaking and waited. Jae-won looked at the room once more. Then he holstered the Sig Sauer, straightened his jacket, and turned to Zara with the flat, uninflected authority of a man who had been giving orders since he was 19 years old. Clean the room. He would assess the situation in the morning and decide whether she retained the position. Mr. Hayo would show her where the supplies were kept. He turned to leave. I know your face. Her voice wasn't loud. That was the thing about it. There was no shout, no desperation, none of the trembling that people usually produced when they spoke to him without permission. Just a quiet, absolute certainty that stopped him the way a quiet thing sometimes stops you more completely than a loud one. Jae-won turned back slowly. Zara had straightened. The frosting was still on her hands. The children were still on the floor behind her, Kai now attempting to reattach a broken candle to the cake with focused, four-fingered determination. Amara having apparently decided the Buddha statue required frosting as well. Zara looked at Jae-won with the expression of a woman who had run completely out of patience for powerful men who spoke and then walked away without consequence. She said she didn't know his name. She had never known his name. But she knew his face. She had spent 2.5 years knowing his face, and she had things to say to it. Something shifted in the room's air. Jae-won came back in. He pulled the door closed behind him. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet and precise. He needed a DNA sample from the boy and from the girl. Hair, saliva, either would do. He had a private physician, Dr. Han Sung-joon, who would process the samples discreetly within 48 hours. That he would arrange collection tomorrow morning. Until the results came back, nothing about the current situation would change. Zara looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "The boy's name is Kai. The girl is Amara. They are 20 months old, And she did not need his physician or his 48 hours because she had been there in that hotel room in Mapogu, and she knew exactly what had happened, and she knew exactly what the results of his test would say. And the only person in this room who needed a piece of paper to confirm the truth was him. Jaewon said nothing, so Zara told him the rest. She found out she was pregnant 2 weeks after that night, alone in a studio apartment in Mangwon-dong, the size of his current office bathroom. She had come to Korea from Accra on a nursing scholarship 5 years earlier, overstayed her visa to remain close to the only real friend she had ever had. Then that friend died. Cancer. Fast and merciless. And the night of the funeral was the night she walked into that bar in Mapogu and met a man who never told her his name. When the morning sickness made night shifts at the hospital impossible, she was let go. Losing the job meant losing the work visa sponsorship. Losing the sponsorship meant no legal status, which meant no formal employment, which meant cleaning office buildings in Yeouido under informal arrangements, cash only, all the way into her 8th month because there was no other option. She gave birth at a public maternity ward in Mapogu. Labor lasted 17 hours. Kai's umbilical cord was wrapped around his neck when he came out. The attending nurse had called for the duty doctor at 3 a.m., while Zara lay on the table losing blood she couldn't afford to lose. There were consent forms to sign, decisions to make about interventions, about risks, about what should happen if she didn't make it through. She signed them herself. Her own name, in her own hand, because there was no one else in the building who had any reason to sign them for her. She stopped. The sitting room was very quiet. Kai had given up on the candle and was now leaning against his sister, both of them drowsy, the long chaos of the evening finally pulling them toward sleep. Jaewon stood completely still in the center of the ruined room. He had ordered men killed for lesser offenses than silence, and he had sat across tables from prosecutors and rival syndicate heads and government officials and never once had nothing to say. He always had something to say. Words were instruments, same as everything else. You picked the right one and applied it with precision, and the situation moved in the direction you needed it to move. He had nothing. Not a single word. He didn't sleep. Not the first night. Not the second. When he lay on his back in the dark of the master bedroom and stared at the ceiling and ran the math again, the same math he had done standing in the sitting room with a gun in his hand and frosting on his floor, as though repetition might change the answer. It never did. 20 months, plus 9. 30 months, 2.5 years. The numbers were not complicated. The implications were enormous. Park Sung-min handled the collection without questions, the way he handled everything, quietly and efficiently, without a trace of the curiosity that must have been burning through him. A strand of hair lifted from Kai's collar while the children ate breakfast. A spoon Amara had used, sealed in a small evidence bag before it reached the sink. Both delivered to Dr. Han Sung-jun's private clinic in Apgujeong by 8 a.m. Dr. Han, who had kept Kang family secrets for 11 years without once giving Jaewon a reason to regret the arrangement, ran the test once, got the result, and ran it again. The encrypted message arrived on the morning of the 3rd day. Jaewon read it at his study desk, alone, door closed. Kang Jihoon, biological father of Kai Mensa and Amara Mensa. Probability, 99.97%. He read it 3 times. Then he set his phone down and picked up the supplementary report Park had compiled on Zara Mensa, because Park Sung-min anticipated needs before they were voiced, which was why he had survived 19 years as second in command to a man who tolerated very little. But the report was 12 pages. Jaewon read all of them. The studio apartment in Mangwon-dong, 21 square meters, shared building bathroom on the 3rd floor, monthly rent paid in cash because she had no bank account with a Korean guarantor. The 3 jobs she had cycled between: hospital cleaning from 5 a.m., convenience store cashier 2 afternoons a week, and private tutoring in English to elementary school children on weekends. He conducted in a Mapo cafe because she had no space in the apartment to receive anyone. The second-hand infant carrier she had purchased from an online second-hand market for $8,000, won and used until the stitching along the left shoulder strap split entirely, then used for 3 more weeks with the strap knotted. The one pair of shoes documented across 18 months of her movement records, the same shoes, resoled twice at a cobbler in Mangwon Market, and the second razzling done with a different color rubber because she had chosen the cheaper option. Jae-won put the report down. He had no language for what moved through him then. Emotion, in the architecture of his life, had been a structural weakness to be engineered out. His father had taught him that at 11 years old, standing over his mother's body in the street, refusing to let him cry. What Jae-won felt now wasn't emotion in any form he recognized. It was weight, a physical, pressing, a relentless weight settling through his chest and not stopping, moving down through him like something irreversible, like the first crack in a foundation that has been bearing too much for too long. He had been sleeping on Egyptian cotton in a Seongbuk-dong estate while his daughter wore a carrier held together by a knot. He sat with that for a long time. Then he pressed the intercom and told Mr. Oh to send Zara to the study. She came in with the particular stillness of someone who has already prepared themselves for bad news. Chin level, hands quiet at her sides, nothing on her face that she hadn't chosen to put there. Jae-won slid the printed results across the desk without speaking. She looked at them, read them once, completely, without rushing. Then she set the paper down and looked up at him with eyes that were dry and direct and somehow worse than tears. She asked quietly, what he planned to do with the information? Jae-won said the children would want for nothing from this point forward. He would see to it personally, whatever they needed. Wanting for nothing, Zara said, and having a father are 2 different things, Mr. Kang. Her voice didn't waver. Which one are you actually offering? The silence that followed had no clean answer in it. And then, from the hallway outside the study, the sharp, unmistakable percussion of designer heels striking marble. Measured, deliberate, growing louder. Yoon Soo-yeon was back from Jeju. The study door flew open. If you felt that, the weight of those 12 pages, the crack in that foundation, then you already know this story isn't finished with you yet. Subscribe before you go, because what walks through that door will change everything. Yoon Soo-yeon took in the room in under 3 seconds. That was the thing about her. Whatever else she was not slow. She had grown up in the Yoon Group boardrooms the way other children grew up in playgrounds, absorbing by osmosis the particular skill of reading a space for threat and advantage before anyone in it had finished their first sentence. She clocked Zara first, the gray uniform, the stillness, the hands folded at her sides. Then the desk, then the single sheet of paper lying face up on the mahogany surface, then Jae-won's expression, and which was the expression of a man who had been caught by something he hadn't seen coming and had not yet decided how to respond. Soo-yeon crossed to the desk and picked up the paper before either of them spoke. She read it the way she read contracts, fast, precise, extracting only what mattered. Her face didn't change while she read. That was the most unsettling part. When she set it back down and turned to look at Zara, her expression was still composed. Perfectly, surgically composed. The way a blade is composed before it moves. Then she spoke. What followed was not a tantrum. Soo-yeon Yoon did not do tantrums. Tantrums were for people who had not yet learned that cruelty delivered calmly lands deeper and stays longer. She spoke with the measured precision of someone who had been sharpening words since childhood and knew exactly where to place each one for maximum damage. She addressed Zara's background, the visa, the cleaning work, the public maternity ward. All of it evidently accessible to a woman whose father owned 3 private intelligence firms. She addressed the children, using a word for them that Jae-won would not repeat afterward. Not to anyone. She addressed what this meant for the Yoon-Kang alliance. 3 years of structured negotiation, 2 families, agreements that went well beyond an engagement and into territory that involved moving significant money across borders in ways that required mutual trust to remain invisible. My every sentence was a grenade placed with care. Zara did not move. That was perhaps the most remarkable thing in the room. Not Soo-yeon's precision, not Jae-won's stillness, but the complete and total absence of flinch in the woman standing in the gray uniform by the study wall. Zara watched Soo-yeon the way you watch weather moving across a sky, acknowledging its presence, tracing its path, but not for a single moment suggesting it had any authority over the ground beneath your feet. By 20 months of signing your own consent forms at 3 a.m., of knotting a torn carrier strap because 8001 was all there was. 20 months of that removes certain things from a person. The capacity to be broken by a rich woman's words was one of them. Soo-yeon noticed. It made her sharper. Jae-won stepped between them. He did it without raising his voice, without any of the gestures that men in his position sometimes used to remind rooms who they were. And he simply moved, placed himself in the space between the 2 women, and when he spoke, his voice carried the specific, final quality of a door being closed and locked from the inside. He said the engagement was over. He said the Yoon-Kang arrangement, in its current form, was concluded. He said Soo-yeon was welcome to leave through whatever exit she preferred, and she could keep everything he had given her. The jewelry, all of it. He didn't want any of it back. 4 sentences, each one clean. None of them cruel. Soo-yeon looked at him for a long moment. Something moved behind her eyes. Not grief, not love, but the particular shock of a woman who has never in her life been made to feel expendable and is experiencing it for the first time. She picked up her bag, walked to the door. Then she stopped, her hand on the frame, her back still to the room. When she spoke again, now the composure was intact, but the warmth underneath it, the performative warmth she usually maintained as a social instrument, was completely gone. Her father would hear about this tonight, she said, all of it. And Chairman Yoon Byung-chul, she wanted Jae-won to understand clearly, did not end alliances. He ended the people who broke them. The door closed. The room held its silence. Jae-won stood at the window and looked out at Seoul, burning in the dark below. The same city, the same lights, and the same empire he had spent 19 years building, and understood with the cold clarity of a man who had started enough wars to recognize the opening move of one, that the next thing coming would not arrive with a warning. He had ended the engagement. He had protected the room behind him. The first move in a war he hadn't chosen had just been made. The message arrived 3 days later from a number that didn't exist. No text, no introduction, just 3 photographs sent in sequence, 30 seconds apart, as if the sender wanted each one to land separately and be understood separately before the next arrived. The first showed Zara's building in Mangwon-dong, the narrow street, the blue awning of the convenience store on the ground floor, the 3rd-floor window with the crack in the lower left corner that the landlord had never repaired. Shot from street level, close enough to read the unit number on the buzzer panel. And the second showed the children's daycare in Mapo, the painted gate, the small yard, the row of miniature shoes lined up outside the entrance door. Kai's shoes were on the left. The photographer had been standing close enough to see that. The third was a supermarket aisle. Zara, her back to the camera, Amara on her hip, reaching for formula on the 3rd shelf. The kind of photograph that requires patience, the kind that requires having followed someone long enough to know their schedule. And no words accompanied any of them. None were necessary. Chairman Yoon Byung-chul was not sending a threat. He was sending a demonstration. I see everything. I was already there before you knew to look. Jae-won had Park Sung-min on the phone before the third image finished loading. The war room beneath the Kang estate had no windows and one entrance. By 7 a.m., Park and all 6 senior Brotherhood captains were seated around the table. As the 3 photographs enlarged on the wall screen behind Jae-won's head. Nobody spoke during the briefing. Nobody needed to. Men who had survived this long in this world knew what a targeting package looked like. The orders took 4 minutes to deliver. Zara and the children would move into the estate's eastern secure wing within the hour. The rooms with reinforced doors and a separate ventilation system. 4-man rotation on their floor around the clock, no exceptions. All of Zara's previous movement patterns were now compromised. She would not return to Mangwon-dong, the daycare, or any location documented in those photographs until further notice. Park would personally vet everyone currently employed at the estate within 24 hours. The captains dispersed without ceremony. Zara listened to all of it standing in the kitchen doorway with Kai on her hip and Amara holding the hem of her uniform. And when Jae-won finished, then she was quiet for exactly the length of time it took her to form her response with care. Then she said no. She would not raise her children inside these walls. She would not let Kai and Amara grow up in a compound where the staff carried weapons and the basement had a room with no windows. She wanted enough money to leave. Seoul, Korea, the entire geography of whatever this was. Tokyo, she said, or Nairobi. Somewhere that was simply far. Jae-won looked at her steadily. And he told her Chairman Yoon had consolidated relationships in Tokyo 20 years ago. He had a standing arrangement with a private security firm in Singapore. Dubai had received 2 Yoon Group subsidiaries in the last 18 months. There was no city far enough, not from a man with that kind of infrastructure and that specific kind of motivation. She was inside this now, not because she had chosen it, because her children's blood had chosen it for them both. Not in the only place on earth where that blood was currently protected was inside this estate, behind these walls, under his name. Zara looked at him for a long time. He watched her weigh it, the refusal against the reality, and watched the reality win. She didn't say he was right. She just stopped arguing. She turned and carried Kai down the hallway toward the eastern wing, Amara following, and Jae-won watched them go with something tightening in his chest that had no clean name. And the gate camera alert came at 11 a.m. 5 black Genesis G90S moving in formation. 16 men in identical charcoal suits deploying from the vehicles with the practiced efficiency of people who did this regularly. And at the center of it, stepping out of the middle car with a gold-handled cane and the unhurried ease of a man who had never once in his life arrived somewhere uninvited and been turned away, Chairman Yoon Byung-chul, silver-haired, immaculate, smiling the smile of a man who owned the people who raised their voices so he never had to. Jae-won had Park locked down the eastern wing. Confirmed Zara and the children were in the basement safe room with Mr. O and Park's most trusted captain, and walked out through the front entrance alone. No jacket, no visible weapon. Chairman Yoon watched him cross the courtyard with something that might have been amusement. He waited until Jae-won stopped 6 feet away before he spoke. Warm, almost paternal. The tone of a man delivering an obvious conclusion to a conversation that in his mind had already ended. The situation, the chairman said, had become untidy. These things happened. No permanent damage had been done, not yet. Jae-won would sever the current arrangement quietly, return to Su-yeon by the end of the week, and the last several days would be treated as a private matter that resolved itself. The Black Crane Brotherhood would continue to operate under the umbrella of Yoon Group protection, as it always had. Everything would return to its correct position. Or, and here the warmth in the chairman's voice thinned to something underneath it, something considerably older and colder, The Yoon Group's legal division would begin a very thorough examination of the Brotherhood's financial architecture. Simultaneously, a certain information currently held in confidence would find its way to the three prosecutors who had been building a case against the Black Crane Brotherhood for the past 4 years and simply lacked the final documentation to proceed. That process, once started, the chairman said, would not be something Jae-won could stop. The 16 security men stood in a semicircle behind the chairman. None of them had drawn yet. They didn't need to. The geometry of the situation made the point without assistance. Jae-won reached beneath his jacket and drew the Sig Sauer. 16 weapons cleared their holsters in the same instant, a single sharp metallic sound, like one enormous mechanism engaging. The courtyard went completely still. Jae-won did not look at any of them. He looked only at Chairman Yoon, and he spoke quietly enough that the security men on the outer edge would not have caught all of it. The last person who had made a specific threat against his children, he said, was still being looked for. That situation remained open. The chairman should take a moment right now to consider carefully whether he wanted his name added to the same list. The smile on Chairman Yoon's face did not disappear, but something behind it recalculated. The courtyard held its breath. Then footsteps sounded from the estate entrance. Slow, unhurried, in the specific pace of a man who has never needed to rush because he has always arrived exactly when he intended to. Mr. O came down the front steps carrying a manila folder the color of old bone, edges worn soft with age, handled many times over many years. He descended to the courtyard level, crossed to where the two men stood, and bowed to Chairman Yoon with the impeccable courtesy he extended to everyone regardless of circumstance. Then he opened the folder, and he began to speak. Mr. Ah-oh spoke the way he did everything, without performance, without hurry, in the level tone of a man recounting facts that had simply been waiting in an orderly row for the correct moment to be called forward. He had served the Kang estate for 35 years, he began. In that time he had learned, as anyone learns who pays attention in proximity to powerful men, that power leaves trails, not always visible ones, but trails nonetheless. For those patient enough to follow them to their ends and careful enough to keep what they found. In the summer of 2005, Chairman Yoon Byung-chul had spent 6 weeks at the Yoon family villa in Gapyeong with his wife and their daughter, who was 12 years old that year. Also present at the villa that summer, as part of the domestic staff arranged through a hospitality agency, was a young woman named Melissa Santos, 23 years old, from Cebu in the Philippines. Mr. O turned a page. Melissa Santos returned to the Philippines in October of 2005. In March of 2006, she gave birth to a son. The boy was registered under the name Michael Santos, later amended through a Canadian immigration process to Michael Yoon Santos. When Melissa relocated to Vancouver in 2009 under a sponsored visa arrangement, the sponsorship funded through a shell company registered in Labuan, Malaysia, which had been making consistent monthly transfers to a Canadian account for the past 18 years. So Michael Yoon Santos was currently 19 years old. He worked part-time at a technology firm in Vancouver. He did not know who his biological father was. Mr. O closed the folder. He did not look at Chairman Yoon when he finished. He simply stood with his hands folded in front of him and waited, with the patience of a man who had been waiting for the right moment for a very long time and felt no need to rush now that it had arrived. The courtyard was absolutely silent. One by one, without meaning to, the 16 security men looked at their employer. It was involuntary. The instinct of people recalibrating, reassessing the ground beneath them when it shifts without warning. Chairman Yoon's face had undergone a transformation that no amount of composure could fully arrest. The color had left it, not gradually, all at once, the way color leaves a thing when something essential is removed. What remained was the face of a man who had spent 4 decades constructing an edifice on a particular foundation and had just watched someone remove a load-bearing wall. The gold-handled cane was very still. Jae-won lowered the Sig Sauer. He spoke without raising his voice, with the same calm finality he had used in the study 3 days earlier when he ended a 3-year engagement in 4 sentences. "Two options," he said. The chairman could give the order to withdraw all vehicles, and all surveillance, all legal and extra-legal pressure currently being assembled against the Brotherhood, and return to Seoul, and the folder in Mr. O's hands would go back into whatever drawer it had come from and remain there undisturbed. Or the chairman could decline, and by tomorrow morning every major news desk in Korea, every rival Chaebol family, and every international partner the Yoon Group had spent 40 years cultivating on the foundation of its reputation for family integrity and moral rectitude, would receive a complete copy of the file, including the 18 years of financial records tracing the Labuan transfers. The man, Jae-won added quietly, who had used the word he had used in that study to describe Kai and Amara, that man had been hiding his own son in Vancouver for 19 years. And the chairman looked at him for a long moment. Then he turned to his men. He told them to return to the vehicles. He walked back across the courtyard without looking at Jae-won again. His cane struck the stone driveway in a steady rhythm, measured, deliberate, but something in the sound had changed. It no longer rang like authority marking its territory. It rang like a countdown that had finally reached 0. He got into the middle genesis without assistance. The door closed, and the 5-vehicle convoy moved through the estate gates and disappeared into the Seongbuk-dong streets without a word. The gates closed behind them. Jae-won stood in the empty courtyard for a moment, listening to the silence settle. Then he turned to Mr. O. He asked when. When had the old man acquired the file? Mr. O considered the question with the brief, genuine thoughtfulness he gave to everything. Then he said, "The night of your birthday, when you stood in the sitting-room doorway, and the way you looked at those children." He paused. "I have served this family for 35 years. I know what the Kang name has cost. I also know what it is capable of, when there is something worth protecting." He held the folder out. Jae-won took it. Then he placed his hand on Mr. O's shoulder, just once, just briefly, with the full and uncomplicated weight of everything he had no words adequate to say. It was the deepest thank you Kang Jae-won knew how to give, and Mr. O, who had known him since he was a boy, understood it completely. The estate settled into a quiet that nobody in it entirely trusted at first. The specific tension of people waiting for the next thing to arrive. It didn't. The days passed without incident. Chairman Yoon's convoy did not return. The surveillance photographs stopped. Whatever calculation the chairman was running had apparently, for now, reached a different conclusion. And into that quiet, almost without anyone noticing it happening, Jae-won began to change his schedule. He came home before midnight first, then before 10. Then one Thursday that Park Sung-min would later describe to his wife as the day he genuinely questioned his own perception of reality, before 8. Overseas calls were rescheduled to mornings. A standing dinner with the Brotherhood's Busan captains was moved again, then quietly delegated. Park began handling sign-offs that had previously required Jae-won's direct authorization on the grounds that the boss was, Park searched for the right word, unavailable. Park's wife, when he relayed all of this across the dinner table one evening, listened carefully and then said it didn't sound like the boss had lost his mind. It sounded like he had found it. Park considered this for a moment. Then he went back to his food and said nothing, which was his way of acknowledging she was probably right. The learning curve was not graceful. Jae-won's first attempt at changing Amara's diaper ended with the diaper sideways, the clean outfit requiring replacement, and Amara regarding him throughout with an expression of frank skepticism that seemed advanced for someone 20 months old. She kicked continuously and with apparent purpose. He tried 4 times before the result was acceptable. Yes, and by the end, he was sweating in a way that 19 years of high-stakes negotiation had never once produced. Kai's bottle took 6 attempts to get to the right temperature. Too hot, too cold, too hot again. Kai rejected each one with the decisive head turn of someone who had standards and intended to maintain them. On the 6th try, Jaewon got it right, and Kai accepted it and drank with the calm satisfaction of someone whose patience had finally been rewarded. And Jaewon stood at the kitchen counter watching him and felt the particular quiet pride of a man who has just successfully completed something that should have been simple and wasn't. The bedtime reading was its own category of experience. Where the wild things are, Mr. O had purchased a Korean edition from a bookshop in Jongno and left it on the sitting room table without comment. Jaewon picked it up that evening and read it aloud in the voice he used for everything, which was the voice of a man accustomed to rooms going silent when he spoke. It was not, objectively, a bedtime voice. It was a voice more suited to delivering final verdicts than sailing through oceans and forests. But Kai sat in his crib and stared at Jaewon with his dark eyes completely fixed, not blinking, as though this were the most compelling thing he had ever heard. Amara leaned against the crib rail and chewed her sleeve and listened. He practiced. He got better. The voice softened by degrees, the way things soften when they are used gently enough and often enough. 3 weeks in, 2 a.m., the estate was quiet all the way down. Jaewon sat at the kitchen island with a glass of scotch he hadn't touched. He heard Zara on the stairs before she appeared, the particular careful step of someone trying not to wake a sleeping house. She stopped when she saw him, then continued to the counter and put the kettle on without asking if he minded the company, and he didn't. They sat on opposite sides of the island in the dark, and for a while neither spoke. Then, in the way conversations begin at 2 a.m. when the usual defenses have gone to sleep along with everything else, they began to talk. Not about the children. Not about the chairman or the brotherhood or the architecture of the situation they were both standing inside. About other things. Older things. He told her about his mother, how she had died when he was 11, and a message delivered by a rival family to his father through the most direct means available, in the street, in daylight, while Jaewon watched from 10 feet away. How his father had pulled him back and told him not to cry and had meant it as instruction, not comfort, and how he had obeyed so completely that somewhere in the years that followed he had lost the mechanism entirely. Zara listened without interrupting. Then she told him about Accra, and about the grandmother who had raised her, her mother's mother, a small, precise woman who kept an immaculate garden and held strong opinions about the correct way to fold cloth and had been the only person in Zara's life who made her feel entirely, unconditionally kept. She had died 6 months before Zara received the nursing scholarship to Korea. The scholarship that was supposed to be a beginning had instead been an escape, and in the life she had built here had been built entirely without a net because there was no one left to catch her. They sat with all of that for a while, the two of them in the dark kitchen, each carrying a particular and not entirely dissimilar species of alone. Then Zara finished her tea and said good night, and went back upstairs, and Jaewon sat a while longer with the untouched glass and the silence and something in his chest that was, very slowly and without his full permission, and beginning to thaw. The morning it happened, Jaewon was feeding Kai rice porridge at the kitchen table. Kai was wearing a considerable portion of it, in his hair, along his left cheek, distributed across the front of his shirt in a pattern that suggested active experimentation rather than accident. Jaewon was offering spoonfuls with the focused patience he had been developing, waiting between each one, not rushing. Kai swallowed the last spoonful. Then he looked up, directly at Jaewon, with the clear-eyed certainty of a toddler who has reached a conclusion and sees no reason not to announce it. and said with complete conviction, "Appa." Jae-won put the spoon down. His jaw moved once, silently. He looked up at the ceiling, the way people look up when they are trying to keep something from spilling over, and his eyes went red along the rims, and he sat very still and did not trust himself to do anything else. Kai, satisfied with this response, reached for the spoon. My Zara had come down for coffee. She stopped in the doorway. She stood there and watched the most feared man in Seoul sit at a kitchen table with his eyes fixed on the ceiling and his jaw working against something he hadn't cried in front of anyone since he was 11 years old, undone, completely and without defense, by a single word from a 20-month-old covered in breakfast. She didn't step into the room. She didn't announce herself. She let the moment belong to the two of them entirely. The way some moments need to belong only to the people inside them. That evening, after dinner, after the children were bathed and settled, Zara walked past Kai and Amara's room at 11 o'clock on her way to bed. Jae-won was sitting on the floor outside their door, back against the wall, knees up, hands resting loosely in his lap. No phone, no weapon, no work. Just a man sitting in a dark hallway in complete stillness, listening to his children breathe on the other side of the door. He didn't look up when she passed. She didn't stop. But she slowed just briefly, and something in her expression, the careful, defended expression she had worn since the first night in the sitting room, shifted by a single, almost imperceptible degree. She went to bed, and for the first time in 20 months, she slept without waking once. The estate was dark when he came home. Not the ordinary dark of a house gone to sleep. Every light off, not a single lamp in any window. The kind of deliberate darkness that in Jae-won's world had only ever meant one thing. His hand found the Sig Sauer before the Bentley had fully stopped. He was out of the car in a single movement, senses pulled tight, reading the silence for whatever was inside it. 19 years of survival told him something was wrong. He pushed the front door open and moved into the foyer, and the lights came on. All of them. Every light in the sitting room, flooding the space with warm yellow in an instant. And for the second time in 1 month, Kang Jihoon stopped completely still in his own doorway, weapon in hand, undone not by danger but by the complete and unexpected absence of it. Mr. O stood at the light switch wearing the smallest smile his composure would permit, barely a degree of movement at the corners of his mouth. But on Mr. O, who smiled perhaps 4 times a year, it was enormous. Park Sung-min stood near the window with his arms crossed and his eyes on the floor, a jaw set with the particular tension of a man who is fighting something that keeps trying to reach his face and losing ground steadily. And at the coffee table, the same cedarwood table that had worn frosting on its edge exactly 1 month ago tonight, Kai and Amara sat in their high chairs with chocolate already distributed generously across their faces, grinning with the specific, barely contained joy of children who have been trusted with a secret all day and have somehow, miraculously, kept it. On the table between them, a cake, lopsided, listing slightly to the left, the frosting applied with evident effort and uneven results, thick in some places, thin in others, the work of hands that had never done this before and had refused to let that be a reason not to try. Zara had told Mr. O 3 days ago, quietly, that she had never baked a cake in her life. Mr. O had shown her where the pantry kept the box mixes and said nothing else, which was his way of saying everything. A pressed into the white icing, 2 small handprints, one slightly larger than the other. Kai's and Amara's, chocolate dark against the white, imperfect and absolute, and beneath them, written in unsteady blue frosting in the careful hand of someone learning a new alphabet 1 letter at a time, Sangil Kuga Heo Abba, Happy Birthday, Dad. Jae-won read it once, then he couldn't read it anymore. They sang. Mr. O led in a thin, and dignified voice that had probably not been used for singing in several decades, but offered itself to the occasion with full commitment. Park Sung-min participated off-key with the expression of a man who had faced armed opponents with more composure than this, each note landing in the approximate vicinity of the correct one and no further. Kai and Amara contributed something enthusiastic and rhythmically unrelated to the actual melody, the clapping at intervals that had nothing to do with the song's structure, but added to it anyway. And Zara sang softly, not loudly, not performing, her eyes on Jae-won's face the entire time, watching him the way you watch something you are not yet sure you are allowed to hope for. Jae-won set the Sig Sauer on the table beside the cake. He walked to the high chairs. He bent down and lifted both children at once, one arm for Kai, one for Amara, and straightened with a child on each side. Their sticky hands immediately finding his face and his collar and his hair with the complete lack of ceremony that small children bring to everything. And Kang Jihoon, the doju, the name that changed a room's temperature, the man who had not cried since he was 11 years old, standing in a street in Seongbuk-dong watching his mother fall, cried, without hiding it, without turning away. Without any of the 19 years of careful architecture that had been built specifically to prevent this exact moment from ever occurring. Tears fell into Kai's black hair and into Amara's soft curls, and both children, with the unerring instinct of the very young for what a moment requires, pressed their small chocolate-covered palms against his cheeks and held them there, patting him, steadily, as if comforting the people they loved was something they had always known how to do. Mr. Oh looked at the wall. Park Sung-min looked at the window. Neither of them looked at each other because looking at each other would have required acknowledging what was on both their faces, and neither man was prepared to do that. Zara stood with one hand resting on the back of a chair and let the moment be what it was. Later, when the children were asleep and the estate had settled into its nighttime quiet, Jae-won found Zara on the rooftop terrace. She was standing at the railing with her arms resting on the edge, looking out at Seoul the way she sometimes looked at things, fully, without distance, as though she had decided the world deserved her complete attention, whether it had earned it or not. The Han River ran silver in the distance, and the city blazed in every direction below, 10 million lights that had no idea what had happened in a sitting room 1 floor beneath them 1 month ago and would never need to know. Jae-won came to stand beside her. Not close, not far. He rested his forearms on the railing and looked at the same skyline and was quiet for a moment because what he needed to say deserved the courtesy of being said without rushing. Then he said it. He told her he was not a good man. He said it plainly, without the performance of false modesty or the fishing for contradiction, just a factual accounting of a true thing. His hands had blood on them that would not wash out. He had made choices across 19 years that could not be reframed as anything other than what they were. He was not going to stand on a rooftop and ask her to see him as something he wasn't. He told her he had left her in that hotel room in Mapo-gu, and there was no version of that he could offer her that made it acceptable. Not duty, not danger, not the life he had been raised in and the reflexes it had installed. He had left, and she had been alone. And Kai's cord had been wrapped around his neck at 3 a.m. while she signed her own consent forms, and those were facts that existed independently of his intentions and always would. He told her he intended to spend the rest of his life trying to become the father that Kai and Amara deserved. That part he was certain of, as certain as he had ever been of anything, and certainty was the one currency he had always been able to produce. Then he asked for one thing. Not forgiveness. He hadn't earned it and wouldn't pretend otherwise. Not love. That wasn't something you asked for. It was something that either arrived or didn't on its own terms. Just a chance. The chance to show up every morning with actions instead of words, for as long as it took, and however long after that, until the record of what he did outweighed the record of what he had failed to do. Just a chance to prove it. Zara looked at the city for a long time, and the wind moved across the rooftop, cool and unhurried, and Seoul burned below them the way it always burned, indifferent, relentless, magnificent, asking nothing from anyone. Then she turned to look at him. Her eyes gave him nothing easy. They never had. And they were the eyes of a woman who had crossed an ocean on a scholarship and buried her best friend and signed her own medical consent forms and resoled the same pair of shoes twice and come out the other side of all of it still standing. And those eyes did not hand out chances carelessly, and both of them knew it. She said, "I'm not saying yes." A pause. Long enough to mean something. "I'm not saying no." She turned back to the skyline. And her voice was quiet and level and left absolutely no room for misunderstanding. "Show me. Every morning, every choice, a breath. We'll see." It wasn't a yes. It wasn't absolution. It wasn't the clean resolution that stories sometimes offer at their endings to make the difficult parts feel worthwhile. It was something rarer and more honest than any of those things. It was a door left open by a woman who had every reason to close it and had chosen, with full knowledge of what she was choosing, and to leave it open anyway. Jaewon nodded once. He didn't say thank you. The word felt insufficient for what she had just given him. He just nodded and turned back to the city and stood beside her in the dark, not touching, not yet, two silhouettes against the Seoul night with the Han River threading silver below and everything still ahead of them, uncertain and possible in equal measure. Behind them, through the rooftop door, in a warm room on the second floor of the Kang family estate, Akai and Amara slept in the quiet certainty of children who are safe. A lopsided birthday cake sat on the coffee table with 2 chocolate handprints pressed into the frosting and a message written in unsteady blue beneath them that had meant more than anything in that building, worth more than any account in any country had ever meant to the man who read it. Jaewon looked at the city he had spent 19 years conquering, and he looked at it the way you look at something you are seeing clearly for the first time after a very long blur. And he understood, with the simple and devastating completeness of a truth that had been waiting patiently for him to be ready to receive it, that none of it had made him rich. Not the empire, not the fear, not the offshore accounts or the floors of the tower bearing his name, or the politicians who took his calls, or the prosecutors who looked away. Not a single piece of the vast and costly architecture he had built across the best years of his life. 2 chocolate handprints on a homemade cake had done it. A woman brave enough to survive without him, and honest enough not to pretend that surviving was the same as forgiving. A boy who had looked up from his breakfast and said "Appa" like it was simply the correct word for the person sitting across from him. A girl who had offered a stranger a fistful of birthday cake as though he were simply someone who had been away for a while and was finally home. That was wealth. That was the only kind that counted. That was the only kind that stayed. And he would spend every day he had left proving he understood the difference. If this story found something in you, if you have ever been the one who was left or the one who left or the one who stayed anyway, then you already know why it matters. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. And if it moved you, leave a comment below. Just one word for how it made you feel. The best stories don't end. They just find the right place to pause.